Good day, everybody. My name is Jarkko Saarinen. I'm from the University of Oulu, Finland, and I'm going to talk about tourism and communities and poverty alleviation. And my specific focus is on searching for responsibility in sustainable tourist development. And this presentation is structured in the following way. First, there will be a brief discussion about sustainable tourism policies from global to local level with some short case example. Then we'll look at the challenges that are facing these high aims of policies and the issues of implementations. And finally, we were going to look at possible ways ahead, how to fix the potential problems what we have in the idea of sustainable tourism and its implementation. Okay, let's start. Basically, sustainable tourism, as we understand, well, can understand it in many ways, but whatever way we understand it, what we know is that it is a policy success, and it's a policy success of sustainable tourism research. As Michael Hall has said, it is one of the great success stories of tourist research per se, the idea of sustainable tourism. And based on that, there has been a growing and deepening goals for global responsibility in tourism development. For example, Secretary General of the UNWTO has stated that tourism can be a leading industry in fighting against poverty. And the World Bank has followed the idea, saying that tourism is an attractive vehicle for poverty alleviation and development. These are high policy platforms that are placing a lot of emphasis on the potential positive role of tourism. When they are talking about poverty, we need to understand that what kind of poverty we are dealing with. Basically, we do have a diverse scales of poverty, but the simple categorization is that we can look at poverty as an absolute terms or relative terms. The absolute poverty, as we define it nowadays after 2008, is that we see a person being extreme poor or living in extreme poverty conditions when he or she doesn't earn more than $1.25 per day. That's absolute poverty. Then we have relative poverty, which basically looks how a person is living in relation to the normal living conditions in his or her societal context. That explains that we can study poverty in a global north. But however, in tourism, when we talk about poverty and UN Millennium Development Goals, for example, we focus on absolute poverty. Issues that people are living under $1.25 per day. And this tourism and poverty alleviation issues are highly linked to the United Nations Millennium Development Goals that were set in 2000. And there are several goals like focusing on extreme poverty and hunger, elimination of that, or promote gender equity, which have been placed. There's a lot of emphasis on that tourism could play with these goals. These are high-profile goals for a private sector business, basically, which is quite often in tourist research called as an irresponsible hedonistic consumption. However, when we talk about the potential contribution of sustainable tourism, the potential contribution of tourism in respect to the poverty alleviation, we focus on specific form of tourism, which is called sustainable tourism. As stated by Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, he has stated that insofar as it is developed in a sustainable manner, tourism has the capacity to contribute to poverty alleviation. Basically, so we focus on sustainable tourism when we link tourism to poverty alleviation. So there are these high aims and this policy success. However, what we have found out that when we go to the national level and regional level, we tend to have still high policy aims, but the implementations becomes harder and harder. And especially when we go to local level, the implementation has faced some serious problems. And here is an extreme example, which may not serve, it may not demonstrate the whole landscape of sustainable tourism and its implementations, but we need to look at the critical cases in order to understand the challenges. And this example here from the local level focuses on pro-poor tourism, which is a fancy idea focusing, especially aiming to contribute to those who are the most poor in the communities and in the regions in global south. Pro-poor tourism has been defined in multiple ways, but basically what it aims to do, according to Harold Goodwin, for example, is that it aims to seek to use the mainstream tourism industry to achieve the objective of poverty elimination. So it aims to combine, integrate local communities directly with the mainstream tourist industry without having any brokers, NGOs, community-based tourism organizations, which, according to critical minds, have some cases hindered the possibilities of tourism to create a major input in development-wise. Okay, and this case, what I'm going to show you very briefly here is focusing on northern Namibia in southern Africa, and especially Ovahimbas, which are ethnic minority living in northwest Namibia, the region called Kaukoland in northern Kunene region. They are semi-nomadic people, who basically based on cattle and small livestock herding, and they live in quite harsh environment, which has severe droughts and dry periods in normal conditions, and especially in recent years due to the global environmental change. However, while the conditions are hard, there are new opportunities that are based on visiting tourists after the independence of the Namibia in 1990. So some communities have increasingly turned towards tourist consumption to get additional subsistence from the visiting people. It is highly organized tourism, and it's based mostly on non-local operators. They have a very different setting than many other places in the world, that the communities used to get the tourists who visited there by the guides. They used to get monetary payment. However, it was noted quite soon that the money doesn't spread in a community to households. So there was an agreement done locally that instead of giving money, they will bring gifts, and that these gifts are in a form of foodstuff. Basically, three main items are there: maize meal flour, sugar, and cooking oil, and then maybe some sweets and tobacco and that sort of things. But these three items are the main items that all tourist groups bring when they come with guides, and these are then shared equally with the households after the tourist groups leave the village. And depending on the community size and location, how close they are to the road and the resorts, the monetary value of these benefits range quite heavily, from $90 to $1,300 per community per year. It's a relatively small contribution if you think annually, as it provides about 1 week to 4 weeks living for them per year, depending on the community, of course. So tourism has a small but locally highly valued contribution. People value the visiting tourists and the gifts, the foodstuff that they are getting. Thus, they are willing to play their role to be attractive for the visitors. They cannot control the business. Basically, they are there in a village, in a community, and then the operators will bring the visiting tourists to them, or they go to the next village. The only way that they can play with the tourism is to stay attractive, which they understand that the cultural habitus is the issue that interests tourists. So the question is how to be attractive. What they state in interviews in different communities, I've done field work there several years in several communities, and they all say that basically we need to maintain the culture, the Ovahimpa culture, especially the women. And then the critical question is that how? How do you maintain the Ovahimpa culture in order to be attractive in the eyes of the non-local visitors, non-local people? And there, the question, especially those places which are familiar with tourism, they state that we do not send all the children to school, especially girl child. And that sounds a bit bad, but there's a logic behind their view, their perspective. As if they would educate all the children, they probably would not wear traditionally anymore, or they wouldn't come back to the village, and they would lose the attractiveness. So they kind of voluntarily step out partly away from the modernization of Namibian society. So what they are basically doing, if we do a critical analysis, is that they are delivering the myth, the myth that is expected by the tourist of unchanged primitive people living in a Stone Age conditions, and they are staying educated due to that and potentially poor. So their role, as shown here in one of the tourist advertisements, is to stay as a posing object for visiting tourists to take photographs. Be passive, primitive, exotic cultural object referring to a past nostalgic cultures. Or as Roderick Neumann has stated, stay as good natives. And all this, if you count, if you turn that foodstuff that they receive annually, if you turn that to monetary value, all this, because they get 2 to 5 cents per day per person. So only 2 to 5 cents per day per person, and delivering the myth of unchanged people. And that basically is also creating the idea that the poorness is actually part of the attractiveness as well, not only the cultural features. So we do have challenges. Although this was an extreme case, we can say that there are challenges in high global aims when we go to national and especially when we go to local level on implementing this policy success of sustainable tourism. The challenge in sustainable tourism basically seems to be that there is this global level rhetoric and then local scale implementation issues. And we can spot these problems through 3 W's. That we can think that whose responsibility it is to set sustainable tourism working, and to whom we are responsible when we talk about sustainable tourism, and when should we start working with sustainability. And let's start with the last one. The when basically refers to the idea of these ideals versus reality in implementation. And we can step out for a while from a tourist context to general sustainable development discussions in a policy level. There was a United Nations panel, Resilient People, Resilient Planet, in 2012, and it was focusing on the challenges the world is facing and why we haven't implemented the high aims of sustainable development yet. And the main issue that they pinpointed is that sustainable development has not yet been incorporated into the mainstream economic debate. What they basically said was that economic element in sustainability, instead of ecological and sociocultural, the economic element of sustainability is always more relevant now. We always have a challenge with economic issues, and we need to deal with those, and then we can move forward with ecological and sociocultural. So, economic pillar in this setting seems to be a bit taller, more important than sociocultural and ecological. And we can basically show how this problem has evolved and what is the proper future with this issue by referring to the idea sliding precipice trap. And I hope you can see it from the screen. But it basically says that at the moment we have a difference between economic and non-economic preferences, that the economic issues are much higher than non-economic issues in our decision making. But in future, we think, when we have set the economic issues, we will have this kind of a harmonic ideal side where non-economic and economic factors are equal. This is understandable in a way that it's a long process of implementing this idea of sustainability with harmonic, equal three legs of sustainability, that it takes time. What the problem, however, here is that it seems that we are not moving towards the harmonic future. It seems that the present is kind of sliding. That means that the harmonic future is also going constantly away to the horizon. And that is the problem that we have faced during the past 25 years. That this situation between non-economic and economic, the gap between non-economic and economic indicators and elements have not gone any closer. And we should do something for that, and that refers to the idea of when. So we should start now. To whom are we responsible in sustainable tourism? Due to the economic emphasis in sustainable tourism, the idea, for example, we have these different kind of definitions of sustainability in tourism, and many of them refer to the definitions like here, that sustainable tourism is tourism which is economically viable but does not destroy the resources on which the future of tourism will depend, and so on. If you start thinking carefully what these kind of definitions indicate, you can ask that, what are we sustaining when we talk about tourism or sustainable tourism like this? When we are focusing on the resources on which the future of tourism will depend. We are basically sustaining tourism as an industry. And that's not the idea of sustainable development. Sustainable development focuses on well-being of people, quality of life and environment, not specific industry and its needs, resource needs. So that is a kind of making sustainable tourism thinking very tourist-centric, which may cause problems when you look economic indicators against ecological and sociocultural, as indicated. Okay, finally, whose responsibility is to make sustainable tourism happen? And basically we have aimed to give the responsibility lately to two sides, either the consumption or the production. First, we can think that focus on responsible tourists, that the consumption should be more responsible and sustainable. And there are increasing assumptions that we have these new tourists who are more responsible, more environmentally friendly and awareness in general, and then that should also follow the consumption behavior in tourism. And there are some trend analyses and policy reports that support this idea. However, if we look at the research that has focused on this specific issue, we can see that most academic studies actually show that in spite of a growing awareness and environmental attitudes, it hasn't turned to tourist consumption. So the environmental concerns still remain low in the tourist consumption's priorities based on most of the academic research. So based on this, we cannot yet count on consumers. All right, if the consumers have in a way failed in a large scale, this is not to say that we wouldn't have certain specific groups that are highly responsible. We do have, but the big picture is that we have millions of tourists, and most of them haven't turned their travel behavior towards more environmental friendly behavior. So what about businesses? Well, there are many businesses that are thinking more and more about environmental issues and community issues and basically more responsible business behavior. There are good flagship businesses. However, if you look at again the overall picture, very small number of businesses actually go beyond their legal obligations. They should meet those, but they don't go beyond. And those businesses which may go beyond based on certain guidelines and kind of a sustainable initiatives, those initiatives often tend to be rather industry oriented or quite flexible for them. And we have some examples, different parts of the world, like in northern Finland we have a big resort there, Levi Resort, which has a sustainable, social sustainability goal that indicates that 75% of the employees should be locals. That sounds good, it's a rather big number. However, if you start looking other resorts nearby, big resorts, that 75% is not extremely good. It's actually rather low number. So they basically may have justified their current bad situation by setting a rather low goal, which they can achieve, and then tick a box that social sustainability goal has been done. So in a worst case, we basically legitimize some problematic situations by setting these flexible goals. Okay, so we have these problems with when and the whose responsibility is and to whom we are responsible. So how do we get over of this situation? What would be the conditions for greater responsibility in sustainable tourism? Well, in a general level, first what we should do is we should revise our thinking, because that quite often influences how we act. So first we should think a bit differently. We should decentralize tourism in sustainable tourist discourses. We should think more on tourism in sustainable development, that tourists can contribute to sustainable development, but it's not automatically. We do not earmark certain industry to make sustainable development happen, but it is one good potential, often very good potential industry to do that. So basically, away from sustaining tourism and its resource base towards needs of people and environment, which is the core idea of sustainable development, where sustainable tourism should refer into. And we need to focus on community, their well-being and quality of life indicators, not tourism indicators only. So go beyond economic pillar alone. Second, we should locate the responsibility. And so far, this market-driven approach that we either give it to the consumers or the producers, or both of them, has failed. In the long run, it may work, but I'm not sure if we have time to wait that the market will fix the failure. So this kind of a corporate social responsibility, focusing on poverty alleviation, it hasn't really worked yet in a wider sense. There are good flagship businesses doing extremely good work, but the wider business setting is still behind. Secondly, the creation of a green, perfect consumer who doesn't consume less but consumes in a responsible way hasn't worked really. So we have this structural problem, which is so-called kind of market failure, that we cannot implement the future costs of our current actions to the present prices. So we seem to have this need, which is a bit unpopular these days, but we seem to have a need for setting a bit stronger external policies and regulations to the industry, especially in the context of global climate change, but also related to the poverty alleviation. And for that, we need better governance. Governance is a highly fashionable term nowadays, but it is fashionable not without reason. And especially in sustainability context, it has a great value. As stated by Bill Bramble, destinations wanting to promote sustainable tourism are more likely to be successful when there is effective governance. So governance is a key effective, good, better governance is a key for success in sustainable tourist development. So governance or the sustainable tourism can be seen as a governance tool by which the industry and destination can adapt to change. This change can be sociocultural, it can be economic change, or it can be ongoing environmental change. Obviously, this better governance and setting new better governance systems, especially in a community poverty alleviation context, there needs to be a high level priority of thinking towards power relations and questions that who and what is governed by whom. And we need to understand that even though we often focus the tourism industry as an economy, tourism is not just an economy, it is also a form of governing people. It is all, for example, that Ovahimpa example is a good example that basically the industry is governing the biopolitics, what they look like and what they wear, and the educational level as well. And finally, we need to create some sense of governmentality in tourist business and consumption, and also in communities. Governmentality refers to the idea that there is a governance and also the element how people govern or govern themselves voluntarily. We all experience that in most cases related to the recycling. We know that what we should do and we do that voluntarily. That's kind of an issue of governance, governmentality in that respect. But we need to set this similar kind of automatic, not only economic initiatives, but also ethical initiatives that make us do things more responsibility in consumption, but also in production and policy making. And this governmentality is important, especially because none of the above, what we have discussed earlier, will not happen if we individuals do not start thinking differently. That we look for how we think and how we behave. Basically, we are the ones that we have been waiting for. There are no others helping in that respect. And that then will lead the structures and the larger consumption and the industry to move on also towards more responsible, sustainable tourism. Thank you very much.